Welcome to Smith and Grezzy. This week we've got our old friends Andy Cook and Andrew Baker back with us. We're going to look into the current trend of testing pieces, or let's put it in another way, over large test pieces. So Andy and Andrew, welcome along again, and this should be quite an interesting discussion. There's a few good views on these sort of things at the moment.
Hello, nice to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Simon, if I just give a bit of background for everybody. Ewan Fox wrote recently on 4 Bars Rest, probably about 6 weeks ago now, maybe a wee bit more, I'm not sure, a test piece article. So if I just read out what he mainly was getting at, and that'll start us off. So the title of his article was, "Do you want to go large? The problems with test piece obesity. Is our appetite for everything new and bigger starting to affect our musical well-being?" If you've not read that article yet, then I would urge you, maybe even before you listen to the rest of this podcast, to have a read at that article, because he makes some really good points, and there's a lot of things that we can pick out of that to make the discussion quite healthy. So in the main points in Ewan's article, where he reckons modern elite level brass band test pieces have become a triumph of quantity over quality, immediate satisfaction rather than long-term appreciation. And then he argues that these pieces are offering derivative thinking and padded filler, and they contain things like excessive percussion requirements. Like I say, yeah, if you've had a read it, it'll get you sort of in the mood for it. And we just thought that there's a lot of different things to discuss. We have, between the four of us, been sending little messages back and forwards. So we know that people have different opinions on some of this and some ideas for moving it forward. So I'm quite happy now just to, if people have had a read at it, we'll throw the floor open and maybe let Andrew start things off as to where you thought that article was.
Could I just jump in? I mean, he did say in that article that the Norwegians had reservations about last year about the Lost Circle, and eventually I think it got dropped, due down mainly to length and percussion requirements. Now,
right.
I listened to Lost Circle at the Open to every band. It was that incredibly hot day, and it was overlong. It was too long a piece for me. Well,
see, the thing with this is, and this is where this little quote about they got it dropped allegedly due to its length, percussion requirements, and difficulty. Now, I spoke to a few people about this, and the stories I'm hearing, whether or not they're true or not, was that yes, there were reservations about those things, but there was also some concern that they just didn't think the piece was good enough.
Yeah.
Which is a lot more difficult to say and is obviously subjective. But they have had a history of being quite vocal about the choices they get, the Norwegian bands. They will rail against things for various reasons. So they may be a bit in that as well. One other quote that I'll give you from Ewan's article that I think is quite pertinent is, it appears that many modern elite level test pieces, he's talking here about two
Europeans,
things really. Set test piece European, and particularly own choice European test pieces, right? So it appears that many modern elite level test pieces are simply commissioned for a singular contesting purpose and nothing else. Despite protestations and the boggling forwards to their scores, so that's all the guff about, why the piece is called, To the Mountains and the Moon or something, and sold with a barcode, best buy date, stamped on the packaging. I mean, it makes allusion all the way through to a lot of these on-choice test pieces that have been written in the last 10 years have never seen the light of day again. They're used to sort of bamboozle judges on an initial hearing, and then that's it, but they're found out. Anyway, I think enough of me gabbing on. Andrew, what's your first impressions of that article?
Well, I'm interested to know what a beast means, because there isn't any such thing as a piece of music that's too long if it's well written. Right, I went to the Proms on Saturday to listen to Mahler's Second Symphony. It's an hour and a half long. At no point during that was I sitting thinking, "God, this is batting on a bit." Right, I was gripped, absolutely on the edge of my seat, and that's down to the quality of the composition, and and that's it. That's what it comes down to. So that when we're talking about obesity, are we saying that we want pieces to be shorter because we want to get more bands squeezed in? Or because, most of us haven't got an attention span that can listen to a piece that's longer than 15 minutes, because I think that's wrong. Is he saying that we ought to draw a line in the sand and say, this is the percussion, that we stop here? Having started with, side drum and cymbals in 1913, we've now reached a point where we draw a line and we say, we're not going to develop anymore, we're stopping. And for me, the obesity part of it is, I'm afraid, the lack of quality in the composition. Nothing else. I don't think any of the... For example, the Gavin Higgins piece, So Spoke Albion, that's a long piece. That's 18 and 19 minutes long, but I'm gripped when I'm listening to it. It's a belting piece. As a piece of top quality modern composition, it's superb. There are other pieces that I heard at the Europeans this year in the own choice that I would not in any way say that for. You get sort of 9 minutes in and think, oh, this is dragging a bit, because there's, beyond the kind of noise and the fury, there's nothing to sustain it intellectually. There's nothing going on underneath that makes you think, this is interesting, this is making me think.
Yeah.
That's where I come at it from pieces being obese, that there's effectively 5 minutes of composition stretched into 20 minutes of sound that doesn't actually do very much or mean very much.
A lot of people, Andrew, would call it padding.
I think
just
that's
literally padding it out and cut and pasting certain motives running through, bits of semiquavers, and before you know it, you can extend your piece by God knows how long.
Yeah.
But it's extended with what?
Yeah, that's the issue.
I've heard it called. The thing I'm getting from people who were at the European is too much of this music is 30 seconds of this, 20 seconds of that, and they're calling it goldfish music, right? So that you're just getting bits of this, then it's bits of that, and none of it's connected, none of it's very memorable. I have tried and I have listened, because Andrew, you had a good suggestion. We were just getting ourselves hooked up to this podcast, and you were saying about people need to go if they have access. Go on, I'll let you carry on.
I was just saying people should go and have a listen to the own choice pieces at the European, but don't listen purely from a perspective of I want to be blown away by some impressive brass playing. Go and have a listen to the actual music and see if you can kind of figure out what's going on underneath the hood of it. In comparison with say something like Cloudcatcher Fells. Cloudcatcher Fells is a great example. That's 40 years old. It's 18 minutes long. It's not far off the duration of some of these test pieces we're talking about now. Nobody that I know of says that Cloudcatcher Fells is weak structurally.
No.
There's 9 notes in it, and the whole piece is built out of 9 notes. It's such a clever, and at every point you can hear that little 9-note motif coming back each time, and you just think, God, it's back again. It's really clever. At no point does that get boring or dull. So that that's nearly as long as some of these pieces we're talking about. It's only 2 minutes off. Some of the longest of the own choice pieces that we're talking about in the European this year, but it's a exponentially better quality. That's the issue.
Which is why you're saying you don't really understand what obese means, and it is that if like the Mahler and the John McCabe Cloudcatcher, it's interesting all the way. Whereas some pieces that we're listening to, I can't listen to them. I'll be honest. I'll hold my hand up. I get bored with them, and Lost Circle was one of them.
I suppose the key question is it? Just picking up on that point, is it too long for the purposes that we're designing a piece for? Let's not be around the bush. We're picking a piece for a competition, for competitive purposes. Yeah, it has to be a piece of music. Now, there's always been this sort of truism knocked around that one of the disconnects between the pieces that were written in Europe and the pieces that were written in the UK was that UK banding was based around 20 bands playing a 10-minute piece, and European banding was based around 10 bands playing a 20-minute piece.
Yeah, that's true.
It's sort of less of an issue now, though, because you look at the Europeans, there were 15 bands in that last year. So we're not in the same ballpark that we were before, as per the European pieces are allowed to be longer because there's less bands in the competition. There's not. It's reaching the same levels as an Open, as an Albert Hall. So outright duration, as you say, it's now sort of much of a muchness. That what used to be a truism really isn't there anymore. I suppose before we start out, I mean, when I looked at obesity, the way that Ewan talked about it, the same thing, I really enjoyed the article. I thought that there were several things that it could mean. I'd certainly rather play and rather hear a 12-minute piece that was properly put together and really well composed and really well written, rather than something that just seems to have been extended for the sake of extending it. I mean, we've all seen and we've all played pieces where literally the entire back third of the piece is something you've already played in the first third. And I don't necessarily reach that, and I don't necessarily understand the idea of that. If it's recapitulation of ideas, then fair enough, but do something different with it. I've been faced with an absolute carbon copy of a couple of pages. There's nothing different between them. And even when you get something that does the same thing the second time around, like Land of a Long White Cloud, for example, when it comes back, it's in different keys and it modulates different ways. So that even though it's the same music, it's the same thematic material, it changes, and it changes very, very cleverly, and it keeps you interested in it. As Andy was saying a minute ago, it keeps the drive, it keeps your ear on top of it. And that's a great example of how you do that properly. It's not enough to just say, oh, well, we'll just do the same thing again. I mean, we're talking earlier about percussion requirements as well. Yeah, I mean, 5 and even 6 percussion is sort of the norm at the moment, but that's not necessarily anything new either. I played Rienzi at the Areas, about 20 years ago or something like that. The weird thing about that was you could comfortably get through it on 2 percussion, apart from one section in the middle where you needed 5.
Right.
And that was just a really bizarre example. So, I mean, obesity is not necessarily something, if we're using these terms to define it with, it's not necessarily something that can just be applied to modern pieces. It can be applied to lots of other pieces, lots of transcriptions. Obesity of requirements. Lots of bands in Europe play oversized bands, as we would consider in Britain, because we stick to the formula of 25 brass and percussion as dictated by the score. So pieces have got longer, pieces have got bigger, pieces have got louder to try and test the stamina of the band. Well, if you've got a soloist, as you've discussed before, who can take the instrument off their face 25 bars beforehand, why does that make a difference? So, the extension of duration and things, that seems to be meaningless to me.
That's a biggie for me, Andy. The one about playing. I mean, I've watched these performances on WordPlay and on YouTube. And you look around the band, there are inevitably 5 basses, 4 trombones. One band had an extra horn, 5 on the front row, things like that happening. They had 30 brass players instead of 25. And then that becomes exploited with that very fact you just mentioned about soloists just sat there, letting someone else do the donkey work. You've got a sort of bumper system like you would in an orchestra.
Sorry, carry on.
Go on, no, on you go.
I was just saying, even if you're extending the pieces, to try and test the stamina of the band out, because it's a competition piece, as we said a minute ago, you're not achieving that if you're in that particular context. Or if you write a piece with that in mind, then it's not usable in the UK, because you're going to have your soloists on their teeth by the end of it, because it was written with an idea of people sat next to you in 5-man sections. I've had stuff for basses, a bit of bass player myself. You simply cannot play on 4 players. Okay. So it's been written with an oversized band. I mean, you tell me a B-flat bass player who can sustain a pedal C on their own at forte for 16 bars. Cannot be done. Yeah. But if you've got 2 of you next to you, you can stagger it through between you.
Can I play devil's advocate and say, look, and we're thinking particularly of the own choice European section, right? Yeah. Are all the bands having these pieces written because all the other bands are having these pieces written, if that makes sense? Is that a fair assessment? That because your band's doing it, I've got to do it.
It's sort of become a point
Yeah,
of honour now, hasn't it?
this all goes back. I mean, I'm very lucky that I played with Desford in '86, and Howard did that wonderful arrangement of Daphnis and Chloe.
Mm-hmm.
Now that was a little bit of a sea change, but then I played with YBS when we did Music of the Spheres. But if you listen to that piece, it is musically interesting all the way. But then suddenly, every band seems to think, well, they're doing that. We've got this big problem in banding of copying each other. It's very rare that people come up with anything new. And I just think they've copied and copied and copied until it's just gone haywire, basically.
Yeah, I think that the thing about are people having these pieces written because other bands are having them written, I think that was the case 10 years ago, because you got Music of the Spheres, then you got Journey to the Centre of the Earth for Black Dyke, you got On the Shoulders of Giants written for Corey. Everybody was doing it all of a sudden. Let's have a piece written for my team. I've got the world's best euphonium player, so let's have a piece that's got a stupidly difficult euphonium cadenza in it that nobody else can play. That's, I think, partly how we've got to where we've got. That, to a certain extent, that should have been called out back then and said, you can't really do, you can't just write a piece that shows off your best players and hides the worst ones. That's not a test,
It's kind of become a point of honour, though, hasn't it? That you have to have something new written for your band when you go to the Europeans. I agree with you on that point as well. I mean, we've even got the situation now where, if you look at Corey, and I'm not necessarily calling Corey out, there's a couple of times that they've gone and played a piece that the conductor has written for the band. So that's another dimension to put into the equation there. If you have something specific written for your band, then naturally you're going to sound pretty good on it.
But I think you've hit the nail on the head there somehow, Andy. They've got the conductor doing a piece, which is all well and good. He's a very, very good musician, is Philip. But we are also getting some of the players writing for their band. And it's suddenly gone from, eminent composers like John McCabe writing music to somebody out of the band. And I'm just wondering if their ideas are developed enough, because obviously there's a factor of this type of music that's, it bores me.
Can I read you a little thing? This is on something that we probably will get onto. This new commissioning project where there are 5 bands, Corey, Flowers, Foden's, Co-op and Tredegar. They're sort of jointly commissioning 5 composers. The first one is Richard Blackford, who has written some wonderful music. Can I just read a couple of little bits out of the press release that came out? I thought this was quite pertinent to what we were saying. This is about this new project. At various times, new voices have emerged, which injected energy, innovation, and new ways of thinking into our music. Composers such as Gilbert Vinter, John McCabe, and Philip Wilby, and this is the bit, were all well established before they wrote for the brass band medium later in their careers, with huge and long-lasting impact. Now, doesn't it, say that
that's the important bit.
Yeah. The John McCabe came to this having been a wonderful pianist and a great composer in various mediums, and then he came into the brass band world and wrote a few pieces. Are we now getting sort of younger people writing the sort of, I don't know what you would call them, the sort of stuff that's just not as memorable?
I'm not decrying their efforts, Sandy.
No.
It's more the development of them as composers.
It's the way that it's done.
Shall I tell you? I'll tell you why that's happening. There's one reason why that's happening. If you go to a proper, established professional, if you go to Danny Howard now and say, I want you to write a piece for my band, and it's going to be 17 minutes long, and it's going to be, there's going to be 120 pages of full score, you won't get any change out of 9 or 10 grand.
Yeah.
If you go to a player in your band and say, Can you write me a piece for free for the European? You'll get your piece played at the European Brass Band Championships. They'll grab your hand off.
Yeah. Of course they will.
So the cost of going to the European is whatever, it's about 25 grand, I think, for an overseas one.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to Linz or whatever from here, it's about 25 grand by the time if you've then got to add on 10 grand to commission a piece from a serious, well-renowned, established composer with a big name outside the brass band world, you can't afford to go.
Yeah.
That's why it's happening. And the same is true of Brass in Concert, can I say, as well. The Brass in Concert, an awful lot of the stuff that is commissioned as new music for Brass in Concert is being written for free because the bands don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just to stick in and play devil's advocate for a minute there, because I'm a bloke that sits in a brass band and writes music and hopes that the band will play it. But one of the key things about that is that if I write music for my own band, I expect it to be played because it's good enough, not because it's mine. And that's the difference. And if it's not good enough, I ain't got any problem at all being told that.
Yeah.
One of the things, myself and Mr. Baker had a conversation on this about, was it Bernstein? That all of his best stuff was written when he was trying to write music to break through and to make his name. And he wasn't conducting anywhere. And as soon as he got a decent conducting job, and it was a case of, it doesn't matter, you're going to play it, I'll put it in front of you, the quality of his work drops right off.
Just sorry for the quotes, but this one I think is quite interesting. This is from a conversation from David King, who was interviewed in Norway and asked about compositions and the way things are. And if I just read you this. In the computer age, composers are now able to convey music quickly using Sibelius. That can be a good thing, but it can also be very limiting as well. Because one thing we find in a lot of compositions that don't quite cut it, so to speak, is the fact that the composers cut and paste to try to get a 12-minute work. Don't know where he gets the 12 minutes from. You find it in a lot of the less credible compositions. In terms of technical challenges, they can move bar lines. Now, this is another thing that we know from experience has happened. They can move bar lines, which they think is a lot of fun. The composers seem to enjoy that. Whether I'll write something in 4/4 and end up presenting it on paper in anything but simple time signatures. The frustration, of course, is that the bands and conductors may spend months going through the score, putting it back to where it should have been in the first place, so that it is actually easy. And the composers really have got to ask themselves seriously whether they're doing it for a musical purpose or whether it's actually for a menacing purpose, which is to make it look difficult. Now, I would argue that we know there are instances, we know all these things. People writing things in 4/4 and then writing it in, 2/8 or something, all the way through, they will write stuff and then change bar lines. I've seen it in stuff that's been submitted recently to the music panel, stuff that's patently in 5/4 time, and it's written in so many obscure time signatures. But then there are accents on every crotchet beat.
The classic one, remember, there was St. Magnus. There was that section that's 9/16, 5/8, 3/2, 4/8, and you rewrite it, it's only 3/4.
Yeah, so this happens all the time. Are these pieces now just being written to hoodwink a set of 3 adjudicators who are being bombarded with 14 or 15 own choice test pieces and try and make them look as difficult as possible?
It is one of the things that's definitely happened. We've all run across it. We've all looked at things and just like, yeah, that's across the time signature. I had trouble wrapping my head around the back page of A Tale As Yet Untold, because some of it's in 12/8 and some of it's in 4/4, and it like drops backwards and forwards between it. I think that was more a typesetting concern though, because a 12/8 bar takes up a lot of space on a page, so that's kind of allowable because it's all in 4. Recently, you've probably seen, Milner have been playing Angels and Demons by Peter Graham. Not a bad piece of music. There's a section in the middle of it that's all in 7/16 and 6/16 and 9/16 and things like that. And the entire piece, the way that it's written, there's so much of it I look at and I just think, it would read so much better and it would scan so much better if it was in 7/8 and 9/8 and 3/8 and things, rather than going down to the semiquaver level, because you end up having to count the lines on the top of the beams and say, is that a demi semiquaver or a hemi demi semiquaver, and just where does it land in the bar?
Here's the question you've got to ask about that, and I'm going to put my Composers Union hat on here because I'm conscious I've stuck the knife into composers a little bit, and I don't like doing it because I know how hard it is, right? So the question you've got to ask is, who is asking a composer to do that? Because it's not an instinctive thing to do. You wouldn't normally sit there and write a piece for wind band or orchestra and think, this doesn't really look tricky enough. I'll rebar it in 7/16, right? Now, I have a suspicion, and it's only a suspicion, that people are going to a conductor with a piece and saying, here it is in 3/4, and the conductor's going, well, you can't have a piece in 3/4, it's for the European own choice. Go away and put the same thing in 7/16. And I know this happened with the New Jerusalem. When the New Jerusalem was commissioned for the National Youth Brass Band, a couple of years later it was picked for the finals in the Albert Hall. But Philip Wilby was then asked to write some more difficult stuff because it wasn't considered hard enough. So he had to go away and crowbar in some semiquavers. I'm sure both you guys have played it. Yeah. So there's a bit that in the original is just a kind of big progression of chords. So in the original National Youth Brass Band version, in the contest version, which is the one that's now published, there's a bit that's full of semiquavers going, and it just doesn't seem to fit with anything else. And the reason it doesn't fit with anything else is because he had to spanner it in at the last minute to fit the requirements of contesting, because somebody went back to him and said, Philip, Mr. Well-respected composer who's lecturing in composition and has had works published and performed all over the world and on Radio 3, we don't think your piece is hard enough.
No, well, or is it a case of we don't think your piece looks hard enough?
But could be either. But the fact remains that the contest edition of that piece I don't think is quite as good as the original version, because it's been kind of
meddled with.
Yeah, I mean, it's got some aftermarket spoilers on it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I know that there are loads of instances that we can probably all mention, talking with composers saying that they've written the first version of their piece for one of these things, and then the band have come back, the band and the conductor have come back and said exactly what you've just said, Andrew. It's great, it looks great, but can it be harder? Can you put 3 minutes of really hard technical stuff in? I hate that word technical. I don't know how we can put it.
Fast, flashy and showy.
It's just note shoveling. About 3 minutes of note shoveling, right? Because it doesn't look hard enough, because the piece doesn't have this, it needs a cadenza, it needs this, that and the other. And then do we just end up with identikit pieces then? That
I think there's another point to be taken out of this as well, because you're saying about it doesn't look hard enough on the score, and I understand that. Well, this, going back to our original point for this, obesity, another point that I picked out was obesity of scoring. Because we don't get the situations now in brass bands where we get light scoring all the time. Quite a lot of the time, most of the recent pieces, I'm going to pick on one because I've been picking on pieces tonight, so I've got enough composers that dislike me already. Sand and Stars. When I listen to that at the Open, it's so thickly scored all the way through it, with so many lines at the same time that are very, very complex, that interplay with each other, that they fight with each other. And there is some of it that you look at and you just think, there's no way that's going to be heard. Now, if you're writing for an orchestra, or even if you're writing for a wind band, you've got different tone colours, you've got different timbres of instruments and things like that, and usually a much broader octave range. So in an orchestra, you get vast, sweeping, epic scoring and things like that, and it all works. It's one of the reasons why arranging for brass band is so difficult. You've got to think of brass bands more as a choir or an organ or a keyboard instrument or something like that. If you get the lines that overlap each other, sometimes they fight with each other. Sometimes one just disappears behind the other. As a bass player myself, I'm sat there looking at some of the technical stuff that was written for Sand and Stars and thinking, you could play anything in that bar. And honestly, nobody would have any idea whether you were playing it right or wrong.
You're right there, Andy.
It's worth pointing out on the back of that a lot of the European composers that are now writing for brass band are originally wind band composers.
Yeah.
So
And I
Thierry
think that's an
Delarue,
issue.
who wrote Sand and Star and wrote Fraternity, which I think is brilliant, by the way. I think it's Fraternity is a superb.
Fraternity is
It
superb.
is. That is a good example.
But he's a wind band composer first and foremost. Because frankly, that's where the money is. Nobody's retiring writing music for brass band anytime soon. But there's a lot of money in writing pieces for wind band on the continent and in the States. And people like Thomas Doss and those sort of guys.
We saw the
I've
same
got a lot
thing
of
with
experience writing for wind band.
Yeah, we saw the same thing with Brussels Requiem, for example. If you're a brass bander and you've not heard the wind band version of Brussels Requiem, go away and listen to it, and you'll be completely baffled. It sounds like an entirely different piece, and it works. It works superbly well. But having played that at the Grand Shield, I didn't play it when it was the open piece. Played it at the Grand Shield. There were all sorts of problems with it, and that was another one where the lines didn't cross over each other nicely. They didn't work together nicely. They all fought with each other, and it just felt like the arrangement for brass band was so far behind the one for wind band.
I concur with you, Andy, because I had done a bit of research on that, and it was one of the most miserable run-ups to a contest because it was just going nowhere for me, that particular piece.
Not wishing to pick on it as well, but that's another one where the back half of the piece is just a carbon copy of the front.
Exactly, yeah. There are some very good examples of it, of that sort of cut and pasting, but it depends what you're cut and pasting. If you're cutting and pasting quality music, that's fine. But if you're not, the cutting and pasting nonsense and, things just running in semiquavers, so to speak.
There just seems to be loads and loads of this writing is... How can I put it? Okay, the Proms is on at the minute, right? I've got Radio 3 on. I've got a radio in the kitchen that's always tuned to Radio 3. I don't know how to retune it, actually. It's one of those digital things. Anyway, it's always on Radio 3, so whatever comes on, comes on. Earth Dances, Alison Burtwistle was on about a week ago, and it was fantastic, right? It was brilliant. It was modern, but it was different. It was the voice of the composer was so obvious. It was clear what the composer wanted to say and how they were saying it. It was interesting. I listened to one of these European on-choice test pieces yesterday morning. It starts with a few dramatic, God, I don't know how loud. Absolutely blasting out chords at the beginning. And then it goes into 3 or 4 minutes of just fast. How Andy put it there was, what did you say, Andy? Fighting against each other. And that's exactly what it sounded like. And obviously, as a horn player, you're drawn a little bit to the... I could hear them skittering about and playing these semiquavers. And I thought they could be doing anything in there. Yeah. It's not... it doesn't sound impressive to me. But we're in this sort of vicious circle, aren't we? That because everybody's doing it, everybody's doing it. How do we get out of it? What do we have to... I don't know. What are the solutions to try and change this, to get music that's of better quality?
Years ago,
say something useful.
I'm not harping back, but one exercise I did enjoy was when Bram Gay had a lot to do with the European, and he set the own choice had to be music from a certain period. Yeah. Whether it was the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and it brought out some interesting choices, I've got to say, and some quality playing.
I noticed that I just had a conversation with Ewan earlier today, and he was on about the National Youth Band, which is doing really well at the minute. Yeah. And Martin Brabbins has got them this week, and 2 of the pieces that he's picked for the programme, there is some new stuff. 2 of the pieces he's picked is Pageantry and Variations on a Shining River, Edmund Rubra.
Yeah.
And I think he wants to, he's well known for his champion of British music, but I think he wants to find out how these young kids, how they find that sort of piece, Shining River. They'll never have heard it before, probably. How do they tackle it? Do they like it? Is it hard for them? I think it's a bit of an experiment and things, but it's just good to see those sort of pieces, because that's technical in a very, very different way, those sort of pieces. I'm not on about, going back to that, but do we need pieces that last 18 minutes, 20 minutes to differentiate between any bands.
No, but I think we need pieces that last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in people's consciousness, and that's what we're missing. You think every time we have this discussion, and we've had it a couple of times before, all four of us together, one of the things that we go back to is that you ask people of our generation what some of the great test pieces are. Paganini Variations wasn't originally written as a test piece, was originally written as a piece of music. That's what we're going back to. Is the music the key thing about it? I mean, if we talk about technical difficulty, one of the hardest things I've ever had to play was Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. But musically, it's very, very transparent. You know, you can see right the way through it. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but musically, it's a piece that you can stick in front of an audience and it makes sense. Mr. Baker's smiling because I'm guessing he's one of the people that doesn't like it. I quite enjoy it.
I can't abide it.
There you go. But you like Blitz and I don't.
Yeah,
and there's another one.
I think Blitz is exponentially a better piece than Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. But see, I think Devil in the Deep Blue Sea is a bit of an example of cut and paste. Because there's a lot in that. I mean, the second page of the second chordic part of that is basically exercises on a diminished seventh.
Yeah, you
for a page. I'm not a fan of it. I'm just not a fan of it. And I think that was one of the pieces that a little bit started the rot of, because there was that and Masquerade in the same year. They both came out, and there was this kind of, these are the hardest pieces that have ever been written for brass band at the time. I mean, I was playing Devil in the Albert Hall, and a mate of mine was playing for Point of Air, doing Masquerade at the Open in the same year, and we were sort of having the one-upmanship of who had the most stupid part full of semiquavers. And so there's an element of that's possibly slightly where this started.
I take your point. There's a certain amount of copy and paste in it, but it does at least recapitulate. So when you get the same thing comes back again, it's slightly different. So there's themes, there's variations.
Yeah.
And what we're actually landing on now is pieces where big sections are just chopped out and then spliced in somewhere else, and you play the exact same thing again.
Yeah, I think that we're going to have to start understanding that we're not in the situation that banding has been in for the first 100 years of its existence, right? So up until early 2000s, banding was a very paternalistic thing. People gave us pieces to play. Yeah. Right, there were organisations over and above banding that were basically providing the music. There was the BBC, there was Kiswo, there was Boozy and Hawks, there was the Daily Herald. Yeah, there was all these people over and above banding that were providing pieces for bands to play, and they've all gone, and the money has gone.
Yeah,
right. There was a lot of money in banding when I started, if you knew where to go and look for it, and if you were in one of the better bands. Yeah. You could. There was outside funding coming in for pieces all the time. There were way more contests. There were people like there were breweries and cigarette companies commissioning pieces for their own band contests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that piece, the Embassy Suite, which is a bit of a load of old nonsense, but it's called Embassy Suite because it's named after a brand of fags.
Yeah, exactly.
Cross patons as well. That was Pilkington's glass because it's their symbol, isn't it?
For St Helens, absolutely right. So there were organisations outside banding picking, getting pieces commissioned for us, and now nobody's doing it. The only people that are going to commission pieces for bands to play now are the bands themselves, and the people who've got to lead that are the conductors of the leading bands. Now, I'm really, really excited about this sort of joint venture that Sandy mentioned a bit earlier, that this commission thing, because I think that's exactly what the movement needs. It needs people to go out and commission pieces that aren't test pieces, they're just new music for band, and if they happen to work as a test piece, great. If they don't, they don't. Yeah. But there needs to be somebody commissioning things that are not test pieces, and it's got to fall on the shoulders of the conductors of the leading bands. And the other thing that's got to fall on their shoulders is quality control when they're picking an own choice piece for their band. I find it hard to believe that because I think all the conductors that conduct at that level are serious musicians. Yeah, none of them are lightweights. They've all properly been through an apprenticeship and done the hard yards of learning what music's all about. I don't get why some of them are picking pieces for their band to play that are of, let's be honest, substandard quality. Why would you do it? I don't get it. And the only thing I can think of is actually because it's cheap. Because they can get a piece for nothing from a guy who plays in the band, or they could go and ask Danny Howard to write a piece for him and pay 10 grand.
Is it also the case that if they're doing these own choice things, they want music that is absolutely on the very, very first hearing has to sound impressive? So it doesn't really matter if it's superficial. Are we in a situation that the one thing that staggered me about the article Ewan wrote, when he wrote that a lot of these own choice test pieces from the last 10, 15 years have never been heard of again. They've never been picked up. They've never been played because people have seen through them. Are we looking in the wrong place? If we're looking at on-choice test piece stuff from the likes of the European, are we looking in the wrong place if we're looking for music that's going to have a longer lasting shelf life?
Well, yeah, because that's music that's written to have a shelf life of precisely one contest and try and win you that contest.
Yeah.
And there's nothing particularly wrong with that. But the problem is that since it's our own, since as brass banding is as a wider movement, it's our main source now of new repertoire. It's becoming a problem.
That's the issue. That before it wasn't where all the new test pieces came from, because they came from the BBC and Kiswo and Boozy and Hawks and the Daily Herald and breweries and cigarette companies and all sorts of other people that sponsored contests. Now, the only sources of new music for brass banding really are Brass in Concert and the European Own Choice.
Right.
That's where most of the new commissions for brass band are coming from, and most of them are not being paid for.
This is one of the great things about that initiative that you guys were talking about earlier on. I completely agree with you all. I think it's a really positive thing that the 5 bands are doing. One of the great things about it was that I read through that press release and there was no mention of competition, no mention of contesting at all. And I think that's brilliant. Yeah, because we might get a truly great test piece out of it. But as we've discussed about test pieces in the past, it will be written as a piece of music. And that'll be so refreshing for something to be written just as a piece of music and then be found to be suitable for competitive purposes, rather than something been written for competitive purposes and ending up musically deficient.
Do we need to change the whole mindset then as to what constitutes good music in a test piece format? I can understand young players wanting to show off and wanting to, but a lot of it just sounds so banal and superficial to me. Not really very impressive. Do we need to change the whole mindset about what constitutes a test piece?
I think we do.
I think there's an argument for that, yeah.
Andrew?
To an extent, yeah. But we're talking about kind of younger players wanting to play fast, exciting stuff. I don't know about you guys, but when I was a younger player, I never got to pick the pieces.
No,
it was the conductor of the band that picked what we play, and that's the end of it. So, I wonder, and all of the people who are directing bands now, I mean, I can't speak for the people in Europe, but all of the people who are directing bands in the UK now have all been mentored by people who were kind of serious musicians themselves. They've all been a kind of pupil of Dave King or Roy Newsom or Peter Parks or Richard Evans or Elgar Howarth, Howard Snell, people like that. They're all serious, proper musicians, and the same is true of the European conductors. They're all proper, serious musicians. I don't understand why they're picking what's essentially, in some cases, quite poor music for their band to play just because it shows off a load of flashy noise. I don't get why you would find that to be musically rewarding, and if it's not musically rewarding, why are you doing it?
I think to play devil's advocate with that, Andrew, I think a lot of these conductors do know that these pieces are shallow and superficial, but they're actually doing it. They're doing it because they want to win the contest.
Yeah,
and at the moment,
that is bang on.
At the moment, it seems like they will do anything necessary to try and. I mean, a lot of this. Let's be brutally honest. It's there to hoodwink adjudicators on a first hearing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why they're doing it. If you're a serious, proper composer and you're asked to write a piece of music, but then people that are interfering say, "Yeah, but I need a big cadenza for the euphonium here. It's got to have a top Z and a bottom X, and all this Scooby-Dooing about, and 8 or 9 lines, like Andi says, of things battling against each other, and it compromises their compositional style, attitude, outlook, the way their compositional voice. Let's put it that way. Then they're not going to. The real good composers aren't going to do it, are they?
So we're back to the same problem. And
Yeah.
the problem is that the pieces are being chosen by the bands and the conductors rather than coming through somebody whose primary motivation is, let's produce a good piece of music, let's produce a piece of music for the ages that in 30 years' time people will come back to and say, oh, this is great. Because let's face it, if you're a conductor of a championship section brass band and you're taking part in the Europeans, your job is to win.
Yeah.
And it's not... we've seen... I'm going to go back a bit. We've seen... performance. We've seen conductors go up and produce performances of amazing musical merit and not come away with anything. Bram Tovey, when he was in charge of Foden's, some of the performances that I heard them play, he absolutely refused to play the game, but he produced some absolutely magic music, but he was never in the prizes at the majors or something like that, and it's more about playing the game. So if you ask the bands, if you ask the conductors, you are going to get that kind of music. So it's got to be a move to take that decision away from the people who are actually part of the competition and move it somewhere else.
Yeah, and I'm slightly conscious that I'm kind of, again, castigating conductors here for picking pieces that aren't great. But if a conductor continually picks kind of what you might call high credibility pieces, and they don't win, he ain't going to get the gig next year. He's not going to work. He's not going to put bread on the table. So, that's... So maybe this just obsession with winning contests is the problem. We've reached a point where we're quite happy to put any musical merit to one side if it wins the contest.
I will say one thing. I think this is Europe-led. It's not the UK. I think we're trying to play catch-up with these guys, so to speak, to be more technically challenging. But I do think on mainland Europe that they're the ones that are leading this.
So how do we change the expectations then of what constitutes quality music for those sort of events? Can we?
If I could wave a magic wand, I'd have a serious kind of high quality EBBA music panel, and I would say to the bands, you've got to submit your score for your own choice piece 6 months before the contest, and if we don't like it, you ain't playing it.
There's also a bit of a responsibility on adjudicators as well, because as you say, these pieces are written at one hearing to sound very, very impressive and to trick adjudicators into thinking that they're a great deal harder than they are. But every adjudicator that I've been adjudicated by down the years, as Andy says, quite a lot of them are very, very serious musicians. If they have the opportunity to look at the music beforehand, no matter how black the page is in front of them and how many notes there are all over it, they can look at it and say, well, yeah, but you see that line's the same as that line, and this isn't really there, and I would rewrite that as this and that the other. So that because if they're given the ability to look at it beforehand and work out all of the kinks and say, oh, actually, this really isn't as difficult as I thought, then, the smoke is blown away and you're left behind listening to a piece and just thinking, well, actually, it's not that impressive, is it? So there's a certain duty on the adjudicators to call this kind of thing out as well and say, no, it's smoke and mirrors. I'm not interested. I'm not putting that up there.
That's a difficult one. That I had a conversation about that about 10 years ago. No, more than that, about 15 years ago, with Oliver Westby, the Swiss composer.
Yeah.
And he was adjudicating when the Europeans were in Birmingham about 2006-ish, something like that. Anyway, I was talking to him about, he was doing the own choice bit, and he said the trouble is that probably a third of these pieces are what I describe as failed pieces. That was his words he used. He said that they don't work as pieces of music, but I can't, I'm not here to judge the composition. I'm here to judge whether the notes that are on the page are played correctly, in the right order, by the right people at the right time.
Is that part of the vicious circle of, just everybody's playing the same sort of stuff?
Because we don't allow adjudicators to have that sort of subjective, the moment you start saying to an adjudicator, well, actually, we want you to say something about the piece as well.
Surely that's got to be an element of an own choice, though, hasn't it? mean, if you're going into something, it's the thing I always go back to is artistic gymnastics. You pick your own routine, you pick what goes into it, and you get a technical merit score and you get an artistic interpretation score. So surely that if you're picking your own choice test piece and you're going in with something and your technical merit score is very, very high, but artistically you've achieved absolutely nothing, then surely you should be down the list on that, because every adjudicator, when they listen to a piece of music, they want to hear the band get some music out of it. They don't want to hear a technical exercise. Surely that should be part of the
pieces are just that.
But surely that should be part of the evaluation process as an adjudicator when you're assessing an own choice contest.
Yeah, but the thing is, Andy, though, you look at, I mean, I know Andrew's mentioned brass in concert and stuff like that, and we have had this conversation before about dressing up or story programs. It was story programs. Sorry, apologies. The trouble is, if everybody does a story program is going to win. If in a non-choice test piece contest, everybody's playing shallow music that has a lot of technical bluster and not much music, then the piece that wins is still going to be full of technical bluster and not a lot of music. If everybody's doing the same thing, how do we break away from that?
I mean, also the other thing is if the piece is full of technical waffle and padding and stuffing, but the band play it really, really well.
Yeah.
You can't just go, well, no, you're coming third, lads, because I didn't like your piece. It wasn't a quality piece, therefore you haven't achieved anything particularly of artistic merit, so you get to... Can you imagine the stink that'd cause?
Yeah, I know, but
absolute bloody riots, man.
If your technical waffle isn't saying much, which in an awful lot of cases, I've got to be honest, it doesn't say anything. It's impressive.
There is a band who regularly go to the Norwegian nationals. They don't go to the European, but they go to the Norwegian nationals. And for their own choice, they tend to pick old standards.
Right.
But they don't seem to do that well with them against some of the modern stuff. It's going to take somebody to turn up with Cloudcatcher Fells or something like that, or a really good piece of that ilk.
Well, Corey tried it with Wilfred Eaton's Partita a few years ago at the On Choice of the Europeans, which is a superb piece of music. Yeah, and actually, he's really, really hard as well. But they didn't win.
Very hard.
See, to me, a lot of these, the best way I could sum up some of these test pieces, like listening to them, these sort of own choice things, it's a bit like, the best analogy I could come up with is like watching those big mega truck events that you get in America where there's a body of a truck with like 20-foot wheels on it, trundling across the arena or going up and down bloody banks of sand and stuff. And you think, yeah, it's impressive if you're 10-year-old, but ultimately it's just a bit sort of pointless.
It's not Moscalo, is it?
No.
Do you know what it's becoming reminiscent of for me? And that's Drum Corps International in the States.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever watched it.
Yeah.
Now, I quite like it. I like the silliness of it, and I'm particularly impressed with the choreography. The fact that they're playing these ridiculous things running. But there's zero musical merit, pretty much, in almost all of the programs. Right? It is just bits and pieces of other pieces stitched together in whatever ways kind of suits the choreography that they want to do. So there's no real musical merit to do it, and we are getting a bit that way. It's like, let's play lots of fast, loud, high stuff and have 8 million vibraphones at the front braying away and 6 tam-tams and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
it's not really achieving anything musically, but it's sort of superficially fun to watch. But we're now at the point where brass band test pieces are trying to do that, but we're just sat down. So the interesting bit's gone.
Kind of missing the point.
Yeah.
That sort of brings us on to something else that we wanted to talk about. If you're finished with that topic, if anybody's got anything else on it.
I'm just going to say, Sandy, on that subject, before we move on, and I know what you're going to move on to, I'd like to invite the listeners to send in responses for their what they think.
Yeah.
It might be that we're wide of the mark. Well, a lot will accuse us of being dinosaurs again. But, I'd just like to hear what the listeners, so it's if they'd like to write in and leave a message.
I mean, there's so many aspects of what we've talked about that we've hardly touched on that Andrew and Andy both mentioned early on about like the length of these test pieces, because we have to have so many bands playing them in a contest here. There's all that thing just about the general usefulness of them, as far as the length as well as the way they're written. So if anybody's got any ideas, but that does bring us on to, and this is something that I'm hoping to get some mileage out of Mr. Cook on this one. I've been listening a lot lately, and you know what it's like when you're on your phone or you're on Facebook or YouTube or whatever else. You click on something about garden sheds, and before you know it, you're being inundated with adverts for garden sheds and apps for this, that, and the other, whatever it is. AI music is something that has piqued my interest, and I've been watching videos on it, and I keep getting inundated that I can suddenly be Paul McCartney or Burt Bacharach or somebody, that I can just write these songs by sticking in a few lyrics and a style and all that sort of thing. Andy, I know you work in AI a bit.
I work in IT. I don't actually work in AI.
Okay,
so
right. What's your take on this sort of? Because my worry with it would be, I know there are pros and cons, but some of it is literally quite scary. And
yeah, it is.
Will it start coming into brass band composition? Has it already done it? And I know there's the little piece with Dan Hall and all that sort of thing, but I'm talking about, would it soon be possible to ask AI to write an 18-20 minute composition in the style of a European on-choice test piece and have it generated in 2 or 3 minutes on an AI app?
So in theory, yes, but there are strong caveats to that. We'll take a pace back. When we talk about AI, we're not actually talking about artificial intelligence. There's no real intelligence involved in it.
It's real-time intelligence, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a point that I'll come on to in a minute. So what you're actually looking at is what they call LLMs, large language models. So they apply, basically, it's an algorithm which is trained through machine learning on a very, very large data set in order to return a predictable response. And it's trained basically by users looking at it and saying, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, until eventually it comes back with something coherent. And from there, and also from the relationships that it learns between the sample that it's trained on, say it's trained on English language documents or like that, spots the patterns, works out the way the patterns come together, and from that, it comes to a point where the sentences become cogent and coherent. So in theory, yes, you can do that with music as long as you feed it very large amounts of information on the start. You tell it how to read it, how to understand it, and it will produce it back. But there's no actual intelligence involved in it. It lacks the human capacity for intelligence to think, well, what if we don't do that? It's very much the caveman in the cave. It knows how everything works in the cave. It doesn't want to go outside the cave. So you're not actually going to get anything new from it. What you'll get is basically a regurgitated pattern of something that you've put in based upon the inputs that you've given it, and it will come out with something that looks relatively similar. But there's no understanding there. There's no comprehension about what it's doing. There's no actual intelligence. I mean, how many times do we as composers and arrangers sit and we listen to something when a band plays something back to us, and we can see the notes on the score in front of us are all correct, and we listen to it and just think, yeah, but that doesn't work. And it's that indefinable quality that you don't get from machine learning. I'll give you an example. So I was in a chat with somebody on social media the other day about something, and I was making a point about, I just said, oh, it's like the start of World War One. He didn't know anything about the start of World War One, so he went away and looked it up on Google. And from his point of view, the AI came back to him and said, World War One started because Gavrilo Princip, a student, shot the Archduke Franz Ferdinand on the streets of Sarajevo. At a very, very superficial level, that is correct. but it misses out absolutely everything important about those events. If you go to a lecturer in European history or something like that, and you say, what started World War One? He's going to say, well, first of all, you have to go back to the Treaty of Vienna in 1823, nearly 100 years earlier. And then you have to understand the rise of the nation state and Italian unification in 1862, and so on and so forth, and put all of the context around it. And then you will understand why that one shot on the streets of Sarajevo started World War One. But without that knowledge, what you have in front of you is baseless and meaningless. Yeah. And I feel like AI in music, there's lots of people will be able to produce something to a very, very superficial level by using AI tools. But will they actually be able to produce anything of any real merit? I'm not sure. We already see the situation, and I'm not going to go in hard on these people. We already see the situation of people who sit in a band, get a copy of Sibelius from somewhere and decide, I'm going to throw an arrangement together because I really like this piece. Lord knows that's how I started myself.
Yeah.
Those people have got to be prepared to fail and fail again and again and again, because that's what I did. And I've had conductors run something through, throw it all back at me. It's not good enough. Take it away. Make it work. Make it understand. Go and read some scores. Go and understand how this all fits together. There's no way that AI can shortcut that process for you. You can produce something that will superficially sound entertaining, but you're not ever going to get real musical merit out of it, because at base, it doesn't know what it's doing.
Right. Is there going to come a time when it will? Or is it something that, because I've got to be totally honest, the more I've looked at it the last 2 or 3 weeks, and the more it's been thrown in my face every time I go on Facebook or YouTube, you start to get worried about, I mean, I just listened before we did this about AI composing some Mozart, and it was terrible. It was obviously not, but they had a superficial resemblance to, there was one about Beethoven as well. It sounded vaguely like snippets of Beethoven type stuff, but again, it was 20 seconds of this, 20 seconds of that, all mixed up.
One of the real problems with it. Large language models as they work at the moment. You think about everything that's ever been written by humanity. There's vast quantities of text out there. So training a large language model on text on the English language is actually really quite easy, because there's so much volume that you can throw at it that no matter what happens, it's going to have an example of something that it's learned from. You take a classical composer, somebody like Haydn. He wrote, what was it, 100 symphonies or something like that?
Yeah.
That's still not a very big sample size. So if you're asking an algorithm to go away and produce something that sounds like Haydn, that's probably got the best chance that it does. Was it Beethoven wrote 9 symphonies? So you've only got that sample size to tune it on. I mean, you could throw all his piano work in there, all his string quartets and everything in there. But the other thing it doesn't allow for is that when you've got a composer, they go through a process of growth in their life. They go through a process of evolution. It's one of the discussions that I think I had last time I was on the pod, and I said about the extra movements in Variations on Laudate Dominum that Gregson put in there.
Yeah,
I think Gregson's a fabulous composer. I love so much of what he's written. But I think part of the reason that, for me, those movements don't work musically is because they were written by a man at a very different point in his life than when he wrote the original piece. Okay. And that's part of the reason that they don't fit in there. So if you say make it sound like Mozart, well, are you making it sound like Mozart when he was 15? Are you making it sound like Mozart when he was right towards the end, right in the Requiem? AI is not going to appreciate the difference between it. I keep calling it AI because that's what everyone says. I don't believe it's the correct term. It's a large language model.
No, I think you're right. It's not AI. The things that are coming close to proper AI are things that kind of governments and military and NASA are working on, and they ain't going to be focusing them on writing brass band test pieces anytime soon. But the problem that all of these models have is a lack of hinterland. They don't have the kind of cultural hinterland that a human being would have. I'll give you the way I've sort of illustrated this before. When I was an undergraduate, one of my things I did was musical analysis, right? It was really boring, but I did this thing called semiotic analysis, which is based on linguistics, right? And the idea is that you can learn to understand how a piece of music is put together, even if you know nothing about the style of that music, by looking at the way just looking at it as though it's a bit of language. You look at the way individual bars and phrases are put together, and you start to spot patterns. And I did this whole project in it where you kind of work out roughly. I did it on medieval songs called virelays by Guillaume de Machaut, because I knew nothing about them, and I thought, well, I need to do a piece, do a body of music I know nothing about. So I was trying to do manually as a human being what LLMs are doing as machines now, right? And I got somewhere with it, and I produced a sort of virelay of my own by the end of it. So I wrote this piece in the style of Guillaume de Machaut, and I showed it to one of the lecturers, and he said, well, I can sort of see it, but it's rubbish. He went, I know what you've done, and I get it, and it sort of works, but it's rubbish. And the reason it's rubbish is because you're not Guillaume de Machaut. You don't know what he knows. You haven't been through the experiences. You haven't learned what he's learned. Right. You don't know about the instruments in the way that he knew about the instruments, right? So there's a whole body of knowledge that has to go in that's not just the music. And the other thing is that human beings can do this thing that machines can't do, which was we can make sideways leaps, which IT really, really struggles with. We can do something illogical and go, actually, what if we tried that? What if instead of doing that, we did this really off-the-wall thing? AI composition, for want of a better word, isn't ever, in my lifetime, I don't think, going to be able to do that, because programming a machine to do something illogical and unexpected is really hard. Really hard and
extraordinarily difficult.
With the exception of possibly kind of really, really mainstream pop songs and electronic dance music, there isn't the money to be made from AI composition to be worth doing all that programming and work and learning models and all the rest of it just to produce average pieces. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Sandy, do you think you'd spot one if it came into the music panel? Well, it'd have no name on, would it?
see what I mean? It's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, it's not like me to overreact, but no, I'm only joking. No, I've seen this stuff recently and thought, is this taking this to its sort of bizarre conclusion? I thought if it was possible to say to ask, and I know it can be done in 2-minute songs. It's the fact that I've seen these things produced live on a video. Say, write a song in the style of X, Y, and Z. The song's all about something, and then within literally 20 seconds, this thing produces 2 songs, which sound reasonably credible. Well, they were passable, yeah. I wondered if it was possible to, and sorry, I'm going to drop a composer friend in it now. Will it be possible? Is it possible to say to AI, and it probably won't have the information, but if you said, can you write a 12-minute brass band test piece in the style of Philip Spark that has elements of, and then you could name, 7 or 8 of his wonderful pieces, and would it come up with something that would be like a really pale pastiche of Philip Spark cobbled together? Probably.
At a very, very superficial level, it would probably spit something out based upon the sample size that it's got. But there again, you hit on another problem with it, because to train a large language model, you need an enormous amount of input. And one of the things that there are a lot of court cases and such like going on at the moment is, what have you trained your large language model on? Because if you're training it on music, all of the music is still on copyright, it's still intellectual property for 70 years after the composer's death. So is what you've done even legal? Yeah. And if it does produce something that's remotely like Philip Spark, for example, can Philip Spark then sue you and the AI company for the fact that it's able to do that? Because all of his stuff is very much still his own property. Of course. So that's another thing that AI at the moment is tripping over. There's just no capacity for inspiration on it. You're only going to get something derivative out of it. A large part of one of the things that we're tripping over at the moment in sort of the internet world is that something like 40 to 60% of new text content, news headlines and things like that, because they're used by sports journalists and stuff to try and meet deadlines. Something like 40 to 60% of text that goes on the internet these days is AI generated. And because internet is used to train large language models, you've got large language models training off text written by large language models.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen one of these situations where somebody's gone to, say, ChatGPT or something like that, given it a picture and said, reproduce this picture, do not change anything. Well, what happens is that the picture gradually shifts, and it shifts again, and it shifts again, until it's very slightly different. And you do that 100 times, and at the end of it, you've got a picture that's completely different, that's utterly unrelated to the one that you started with. And this is one of the problems with AI, because there is no intelligence in there, because it's all derivative information. You end up with everything gradually. AI reading from AI leads to very bad outcomes. And the models we have work because they've been trained with people actually looking at them, saying, does what AI's come back with actually make sense? Yes, that's a good response. No, it's a bad response. They can easily collapse under the weight of all the other AIs competing with themselves, to the point that whatever they produce back makes sense to an AI, but not to a person anymore. At which point, what's the value in it?
The other thing that's worth pointing out, certainly with Western classical music, is what do you train it on? Right? Because an awful lot of music just exists as paper scores. So you've got to find a way to get that content in. So you're not giving it something like Sibelius or a MIDI file where the actual notes are defined. You're just giving it a picture of some music. So you've got to teach it to read music. And the problem with that is that musical notation is actually quite imperfect. There's an awful lot of things that musical notation doesn't tell you about how to, even in pieces by Philip Sparke, which are the most well typeset pieces you'll ever see in your life. There's no way in a musical note of telling you how to finish the note. For example, there is nothing. There's lots of things that tell you how to start a note, but there's nothing that tells you how a note should be finished.
See, forgive my ignorance, Andrew. I'm just thinking of these making a song apps that I've seen. They're obviously trained on recordings, aren't they?
I would imagine so.
Rather than the sheet music. Would that not be the case then also with something that's trying to write something that sounds like Brahms or Beethoven?
First of all, you got to find a recording of it. And there's so much music out there that has never been recorded. There's so much that's only exists. I've got a hymn book on my desk at the moment that was put together in a church that's all handwritten. Those arrangements will be slightly different to everything else. There's no recordings of them anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's all about, if you're training it from audio samples and such like, training it from pop music is relatively easy, because pop music's only really existed from sort of like the mid 1950s onwards.
Yeah.
And there's decent recordings of all of it. If you, as Mr. Baker says, if you're looking at Western classical music, you're going back over sort of 300, 400 years, which the vast majority of it has never seen the light of day.
Mm. And the other thing is, typically a pop song will be 3 minutes long. It won't change key. It'll repeat 2 or 3 times and then have a slightly different bit part of the way through. It'll have verse 1, verse 2, middle 8, verse 3, done. Jobs, maybe an intro and an outro. That's your lot. Yeah. It's not a tremendously complex composition.
Yeah.
The same is true of a lot of electronic dance music. That tends to not be sort of verse, chorus, but it's not. It's not modulating, it's not changing key, it's not changing orchestration. So if you're going to the biggest corpus of music that you could train an AI on that exists in usable formats is probably Bach, right?
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that he wrote, and
it all follows very, very logical mathematical.
It all follows a set of rules that we all learn in school. You go and do your Riemann Schneider chorale exercises for 4-part harmony and all that kind of stuff. So there's a set of logical rules behind it.
Yeah.
But even if you did all that, even if you taught, if you gave the computer oral training, AURAL training, not ORAL, so it could sit there and listen and go, right, that's a piccolo trumpet, that's a recorder, that's an organ, that's a chamber organ, that's a church organ, that's a harpsichord, and it did all that, and it separated out all the things it had listened to, and it worked it all out, and it produced a model of it. It still wouldn't produce something that was Bach, because it isn't able to do the occasional sideways leap of genius that Bach could do.
Right.
It will produce something that might sound a bit like a knockoff Bach, like one of his kids maybe, But you're never going to get something, I don't think, of genuine quality on the current models that exist, because they're designed to copy existing stuff and pastiche it. They're not designed to create from a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah.
So what you're getting is a pastiche.
I'm panicking then, overreacting.
I think there is potentially an application for it, because we've all been in the situation where if you've sat on a bandstand or helped out or something like that, and so from the band's done this arrangement, and superficially on the surface of it, it sounds all right sometimes. But if you're actually in the band playing it, some of the parts in front of you, you're like, well, none of that makes any musical sense.
Yeah.
So there is an application for a large language model there for music as a whole, as long as it's defined in relatively simple terms for how the instruments are, how they work, and that kind of thing, potentially as a check-in application. So you can put a score into it and it looks at it and says, this is out of your range, this is not going to work for this instrument, but only to a very, very superficial degree. As a tool for a composer, I mean, there's already stuff like that built into most of your music notation software. You know, you can check for parallel fifths and octaves and that kind of thing as well. But only at that level. I think it has some application in that basis, but I don't think we're ever going to hit a situation where, as you say, you could say, write me a 12-minute piece in the style of Philip Spark based around this Lutheran chorale or something like that, and in 2 minutes later you've got a piece in front of you. And
I think there's some hazard for arrangers in it, because I guarantee you there's somebody sat at the desk in Hal Leonard right now trying to work out whether they can do all their concert band arrangements by getting an AI to do it, rather than paying all the various arrangers that are on their staff to do it. I think that, especially at the sort of the simpler kind of youth band end of the market, you know, do me a simplified concert band transcription of this pop song. And you know, you can't exceed this range in these instruments, and here's the percussion you can use. Go, and 2 minutes later, it's churned out a score. I think I think that's a possibility, because that doesn't require particularly original thinking. That, you know, all of that is logical steps.
Yeah.
Every single bit of that process is, well, I'm going to put the clarinet part here. Therefore, if the clarinet's playing that, somebody else is going to have to play that bit, so that'll be the oboe. Those are all logical yes or no binary decisions you have to make, and I think that's an obvious use case for it. But original composition, I don't see that happening in our lifetimes, chaps.
And
so what you're saying, guys, is that me and Sandy, being the dinosaurs we are, will be probably extinct by the time we ever see anything like that. So that suits me in a way.
Yeah. The last thing that I wanted to say on the subject was just that if AI does get clever, I want AI to do my laundry and my washing up, so I've got more time to write music. I don't want it to write music so I can do my laundry and my washing up.
I know.
Yeah.
The people who should be panicking about it are lawyers and accountants, because there's an awful lot of just straightforward, you know, filing company accounts and stuff like that AI can do in the next couple of years. Yeah.
Well, that's been a fascinating conversation on all things music, including AI. I'd like to thank Andrew Baker and Andi Cook for coming along once again. We'd like to think you'll come along again, because we always enjoy your input to these discussions.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Many thanks to all our listeners. And like I say, early in the podcast, if you've got any comments, just send them over. We do actually get quite a lot of comments, and we do feed off them. So that's over and out for us. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.